the State Federal Veterans Committee. We start on time. It's actually 10:01. Representative Levitt, would you lead us in the pledge, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone here who is at this working session. I want to make clear as I can that this is not a hearing. This is a working session. The reason we have a lot of pink cards is for our administrative purposes, to make sure that we know what potential resources are here that we can recognize to help us understand the different sides to this issue, HB 229, which is with regard to not allowing our National Guard, New Hampshire National Guard, to be activated short of a declaration of war. And so our clerk, Representative Carey, appreciates these pink cards for clerk purposes. The cards will not be turned in as they would be during a hearing. So just so that is clear. So we will. So we're not obliged to recognize anyone. Again, this is a working session, but I appreciate you being here, and we will be looking to have some of you amplify or help us to better understand some of the points of this before we go to executive session. Executive session is scheduled for 10:30, which means we can't go there until 10:30, but I am quite sure that we will go well past 10:30 as we try to make sure we understand every piece of this before we go to executive session. I want to welcome the substitutes we have today. Representative Horrigan, there he is. Welcome, Representative Horrigan. Representative Schultz, are you in the House? Representative Schultz is going to be listed, or is listed as a sub. I do not see her yet. Representative Tularsky, welcome. Glad you're here. Okay, all that said and done, let's get to it. I'd like to lead off looking at these pink cards with Kevin. From SVAC, let me see here. Yeah, Kevin Grady, representing SVAC. Mr. Grady, Kevin, if you could just confirm for the record your name and whom you're representing, and then if you could talk to us about presumably SVAC's position on HB 229.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, happy to do that. For the record, my name is Kevin Grady. I am a 25-year veteran of our Air Force. I am also a 25-year veteran of the town of Hooksett, where we moved when I finished active duty back in '98. Today I'm representing the State Veterans Advisory Committee. We're chartered by state law. We have 20 members to speak for the veteran community in New Hampshire, and every year as chairman of their legislative committee, I look through all the bills that have veteran impact. We take a position on them, and then I come and I tell you all what our position is on that. We unanimously oppose this legislation. We took another vote last Tuesday to see if we wanted to revisit our position on this, and we again were unanimously opposed to this legislation. I want to start out by saying that Title 10 of U.S. law is really the guardrails here. It governs how reserve forces, which the New Hampshire National Guard is, are called up and activated to active military service. For those of you that are really not that familiar with the military, I will tell you one thing that should sort of be in your thought process as you think about this, okay? When we have someone off the street walk in to our Air National Guard or our Army National Guard, okay, the first thing that we do with that person is we send them to basic training, okay? That person goes to regular active duty basic training. There's no such thing as a guard basic training, okay? Same thing for their follow-on skill position. They train right alongside of their counterparts who are on active duty. You literally cannot tell the difference in any given room. And that's the same relationship that we have if Guard and Reserve forces are called to active duty by the National Command Authority in accordance with Title 10. They move in right alongside their active duty folks. They are essentially active duty people. They're paid like active duty people, and they go from there. We have a problem in this bill with the idea that Congress hasn't done their job because we haven't declared war since 1943. And while acknowledging that that is in fact true, okay, we also have to acknowledge that 81 years have passed since then, okay? Back in 1942, we had to have, when it was a call to war, we had to activate the entire economy. Rosie the Riveter went to the factories because there weren't enough men. Because why? The men were drafted and off they went to war. People were told, I know you'd like to make truck tires, but you've got to make airplane tires. As the world's premier economic superpower and arguably the world's premier military superpower, we don't need to do that anymore. And so how does Congress exercise their control over this? Because they control the money. And as a result of the Vietnam experience, the Congress decided to take some of that control back with the War Powers Resolution, which was passed in November of 1973, over President Nixon's veto, by the way, just so that you know, they overrode his veto and it became law. And it basically says, if you're going to send folks out somewhere for more than 60 days with a 30-day redeployment period, you've got to come tell us what you're doing. And otherwise we'll cut the money off. So if you look at recent history, President George H.W. Bush got an authorization to use military force before Desert Storm. President George W. Bush got authorizations to use military force before operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, Congress can take that authorization back anytime they want to. The fact that they haven't is not a discussion for your committee necessarily. Okay, that's one for everything else. There isn't any difference when a soldier gets called to active duty, and it's not optional, from the Guard and the active force. Okay, after Desert Storm, when we downsized all of the militaries, the Guard and Reserve forces became a must-have and not a nice-to-have. Back in the day when I was in the Air Force millions of years ago, okay, what did the Guard have for airplanes? They had the airplanes the active duty didn't want anymore. Okay, what does our Guard have for airplanes? They got the KC-46, the latest and greatest tanker in the Air Force. Okay, there are plenty of KC-135 pilots flying an airplane that's twice as old as they are out there right now that wish they were flying those KC-46s. Same song across the border in Vermont, flying the F-35 over there. So the Guard and Reserve forces, because we're going to need them on an occasional basis to support our operations, are equipped with our latest and greatest munitions, and they're trained at active duty schools so that there is no seam between a Guard person and an active duty person. So everybody should know when they sign on to the Guard and the Reserve that there's a possibility that you're going to end up in a combat zone. And that could happen whether we declare war or not. So it's a little bit of a distinction without a difference. Because the National Command Authority has this ability to call these folks up, because the governor is not in the loop on that, the governor gets consulted. For regular scheduled deployments, the governor knows a couple of years out, and everybody's all on the same page. It's not like we're trying to hide anything here. But the Guard and the Reserve forces that we have in our country right now are must-have, and we can't have a regulation that says we're not going to follow what the federal statutes are. Okay. At the end of the day, our opposition in the State Veterans Advisory Committee is a lot about we're rule followers. We're in the military forever. The military has rules. When this is what the rule says, we follow the rules. Okay. The place to change Title 10 of U.S. law, if we want to make that change, is at the federal level. It's not at the state level. Okay. We've got those great airplanes over at Pease, Could they do that job from Cape Cod or Portland? Sure they could. Sure they could. Okay, we're all kidding ourselves if we don't think that they couldn't. Okay, but what we also don't want to do, we don't want to create, I'm in the Guard, so I'm special. I'm in the Guard, so I shouldn't have to go and take my turn in the barrel like the active duty guy, even though I'm going to be on active duty when I do that. I shouldn't have to do that. we don't want to send that message. And I think that's what the State Veterans Advisory Committee would like you to know today is that we have to follow the rules. It's clearly written down in plain English in Title 10 of U.S. law. And if you want to change this, you've got to change it at the federal level. So subject to any of your questions, sir, I'll get off the stage and let somebody else speak.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. So you said you would take questions,
Yes, sir.
and I have several, and so does. So let's start here with Representative Mannion, one of the co-sponsors.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. When you mentioned in your testimony here, you say that we follow the rules in the United States Constitution. The delegated power for war making is explicitly outlined and handed to Congress for the exact purpose that the people should be the ones to with this the last voice when it comes to the war making ability. Do you believe that us right now using AUMFs are following the rules?
I do. I believe that the Congress has the ability at any. Is there only one person? Did I turn this off? If I did, I'm sorry. Okay. The Congress has the ability to withdraw an AUMF at any time. They've authorized the one since 2001 to fight the global war on terror, basically wherever. If they want to make modifications to that, if they want to do anything with that, they can do that tomorrow.
Follow up. So so when the Congress passed the War Powers Resolution, they now subdelegated their constitutional authority over to the executive branch, which is arguably, and the argument of this entire bill is that is unconstitutional. So 81 years of us not following the Constitution since World War II, you would not see that as a conflict.
I would argue on the other side that the Tonkin Gulf Resolution that was passed in 1964 was essentially Congress giving the president a blank check to go out and do whatever he decided to do. And the War Powers Act of 1973 was Congress deciding that's a bad idea. We have to retain that capability in the Congress. And so therefore, we're going to pass laws that are realistic. Okay. Nobody, there was no such thing as an aircraft carrier or something like that back when the founding fathers wrote this document. Nobody realized the global reach and global power that we have from our naval and air forces anywhere in the world. And so it's not like we have to wait, and build up an army and have it send it on a 6-week sail to get it somewhere. Okay, we've got forces all over the world that can be ready to protect our interests on a moment's notice. And I think that was an attempt by the Congress to say, okay, wait a minute. We understand you have a job to do, Mr. President, but we need to be able to control this to some degree. We're just not giving you a blank check anymore. And I think that's what they did with that act.
Excellent. Another follow-up.
Another follow-up.
All right, this thing does turn itself off. So as you mentioned, the blank check of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, the 2001 AUMF is very arguably a clone of that exact thing. There's no outlined targets. There's no outlined victory conditions, no outlined countries. We've used it as an excuse to invade over 22 countries and largely classified. This is not exposed, not visible to the American taxpayer. We've caused coups in other countries with the training, with the money used under the 2001 AUMF. You don't see that as a repeat of a mistake that was made in the 70s?
Again, Representative, I keep having to go back to the fact that if the Congress of the United States allows this to happen, which they have by this AUMF, then, could you end up with situations like this? The countries you're talking about, there weren't any incursions that are, there couldn't be any incursions longer than 60 days of significant amounts of forces without, again, going back to the Congress and getting an authorization, a specific authorization for that action. So I think the AUMF, could we do things to make that stronger and more limited? Certainly. Okay, is that our place to legislate that from down here in Concord? We don't think so. We think that place to legislate that is in DC with our elected representatives that go there.
Yet another follow-up from the co-sponsor. Thank you. Representative Shurtleff is recognized.
Thank you for being with us as always. the United States has a mutual defense treaty with not with South Korea, and we have thousands of troops stationed in Korea. As we know, in 1951, Kim Jong Un's grandfather invaded South Korea. To keep our American soldiers stationed there out of harm's way, wouldn't it be imperative to mobilize the National Guard to backfill positions so more active duty military could go into that combat zone?
Good question.
Well, sir, that's a question for a diplomat, probably more so.
Well, I thought you were the
than
way.
me. No, sir. I'm just a lowly fighter pilot. You know,
If you want to pass,
I
on
do
that,
kind of
that's
what
fine.
I'm told on that. But no, I've never been stationed in Korea. I've been stationed on Okinawa, where our job was defense of Korea, and I've been to Korea on numerous occasions, and they take their sovereignty very seriously. They land airplanes on roads 2 or 3 times a year just to prove they can do it. And so I understand that. I think anybody that's ever been to Korea would come back with the same thing, that how seriously they take their own defense. And for the most part, they're pretty happy to have us there. Now, again, a diplomat question: Are we there to keep Kim Jong Un from doing something, or are we there to just be there in case we need it in China or Taiwan or some other place? Again, we could get into we need to make a 9G turn.
Follow up?
It's better when the mic's off when I speak, but I won't ask for a vote on that. But this is more as, would you believe, in 1861, after the fall of Fort Sumter, President Lincoln, would you believe, asked for 75,000 volunteers to serve in the Union forces. State militias were brought up and put into federal units to make war against the Confederacy. Congress never declared war on the Confederate States of America. Do you believe that if this bill had passed, a similar circumstance that happened in this country during the Civil War, that the New Hampshire State Militia, now National Guard, would be in the same predicament, not be able to come to the aid of our country and our president? Because there's no declared war.
I shouldn't think so. Then that said, if you pass this bill, you're now one state out of 50 that has said we're not going to follow the rules, and then we would have to see, well, what happens as a result of that? Do other states follow that? Does Congress make changes? I can't foresee the future on that. Or does somebody say, well, we now have 49 states that have the Guard and Reserve in them, and that we have a 50th state there that is, it doesn't have any forces, and instead of being in a position to offer our forces to other states that have emergencies, national disasters, those kind of things, we won't be there to do that up here. And whenever we have something like that, we're going to be dependent on somebody else to do that for us.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
For the record, I do want to point out, and I have been to Korea a couple of times myself, that Korean conflict started by Kim Jong-un's grandfather, Kim Il-sung, happened in 1950, not 1951. I know that's way before your time. Representative Gagg says he remembers it. So anyway, 1950, yes. Representative Mannion is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing I'd point out is nothing in this bill precludes a national defense. If we were to be invaded or something were to attack the homeland, that's completely within the scope of the National Guard's mission, and it would not be affected by the bill whatsoever. But I do have another question. You mentioned in your testimony that we don't want the state to think, or guardsmen to have this attitude of, I'm with the Guard, so I'm special. But the Guard does have a dual mission that's unique versus the active duty military. Is that correct?
The Guard does have a dual mission, but I would also argue that their primary mission in the National Guard is whatever their active duty skill set is, whatever their MOS for the Army or their Air Force Specialty Code for the Air Force is. Their primary job is doing that job and being ready in case the National Command Authority needs them on either a per unit basis or a per person basis. to go somewhere and do something for the National Command Authority. So they do sort of have a dual allegiance, but the one that is their primary mission is whatever their skill set is for their branch of the service.
Before I go back to the co-sponsor, does anyone else have a question for Mr. Grady? Representative Horrigan, we will recognize you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I make this quick. I'm just a guest in this committee, but we're talking about how we haven't had a formal declaration of war since World War II, and then I guess at least some of the proponents of bills feeling that was a mistake and against the Constitution. But what did we? Well, first of all, I guess during World War II, we actually did start intervening and deploying assets even before Pearl Harbor. But with the armed conflicts U.S. got involved with before that, did they all have a formal declaration of war, or did some of them, were authorized, somewhat informally, as has been the case since World War II, with all our armed conflicts, of which there have been many?
Well, I think President Truman took great pains to say that this is not a war in Korea. It's a police action under the United Nations. I'm not a real historian on Vietnam. I probably should be a little more than I am, but that sort of evolved and ramped up after the Tonkin Gulf Resolution in '64. I was in junior high and high school back then and missed out on that conflict. But the stuff since then, Desert Storm, I think there was a pretty clear purpose for what we were doing there. There was originally a purpose for the Iraq and the Afghanistan incursions. At some point in time, it's my personal opinion, Kevin Grady's opinion, not shared by the SVAC or DOD or any of those other people or Taylor Swift's folks. But at some point, we may have lost our way a little bit and included a lot of things in the AUMF, as Representative Mannion says, that really and truly weren't specific to the original purpose of why we were doing what we were doing back in 2001. That said, again, the people that need to change that are Congress at that level.
To Representative Horgan's point, there have been numerous times that we have, post-World War I, we went to Haiti, Nicaragua. We were in Lebanon in 1957 and in 1983 in Lebanon. So there have been numerous occasions where we deployed and used force short of a declaration of war. Representative Mannion, you had your hand up. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have some questions about the structure of the SVAC. So the SVAC's mission statement is what? What would you say that their primary purpose is?
Their primary purpose is kind of generally so that we've got one voice that speaks for the veteran community in New Hampshire, and we have 20 member organizations that do that. I can read them to you if you want, or I can
yes,
provide.
I would actually like the list if you can read them out loud into the record.
We have the Air Force Association, or is now the Air and Space Forces Association, which I represent. We have the Air Force Sergeants Association, the American Legion, the AUSA, Catholic War Veterans, Catholic Veteran Motorcycle Association, Disabled American Veterans, Korean War Veterans Association, the Marine Corps League, the Military Officers Association of America, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the National Guard Association of New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Army Retiree Council, the New Hampshire Guard Enlisted Association, the New Hampshire Veterans Association, Patriot Resilient Leader Institute, the Reserve Officers Association, Rolling Thunder, the Veterans of Foreign War, and the Vietnam Veterans of America. Those are our 20 members of the SVAC, and I'd be happy to leave this. You may have been sent our annual report by our chairman back there, Paul Lloyd, and this is pages 3 and 4 from that annual report.
Thank you. Follow up.
Another follow-up. Go ahead.
So the Department of Military Affairs and Veterans Services were only recently combined into a single department in the state, and that was in 2019. Do you know why that was?
I'll give you just a little history. When Governor Sununu was first elected, Governor Sununu walked into one of our State Veterans Advisory Committee meetings, and his first question was one we couldn't answer. He went, if I have a problem, a veteran comes to me with a problem, where do I send him? And we said, well, we imagine that between the State Veterans Advisory Committee and a lot of our people that meet with us all the time, we probably get the answer to that. But there really wasn't what he would call a single belly button that he could push to get things done or ask a veteran-related question. And that led to about 2 or 3 years worth of legislation and bills that finally culminated in standing up the Department of Military Affairs and Veteran Services to sort of put all of the people that are trying to do good things for veterans all under one roof was commanded by the Adjutant General. And if Colonel Perry has anything different he'd like to add on that, I'd be happy to let him weigh in. Okay.
Representative Mannion, as a co-sponsor, I we're giving you some extra latitude here, and thank you again, Mr. Grady, for speaking up front. I think right up front here, we're getting a lot of the questions asked and answered that we all need to hear, so we'll continue with that process. I do have a lot of pink cards that are coming my way. And I need to, again, remind everybody, this is not a public hearing. We've had a public hearing on February 3rd for this. The purpose of the working session is what's happening right here is to get some folks with some specific information that'll help the committee to better evaluate the bill in toto before we have an exec session. So we'll come back to this. And there are some of the folks, especially as a courtesy to representatives and former representatives, we will give them certainly a chance to speak. But again, if your desire to speak is just simply to do what you may have already done on February 3rd and just say you're in favor of the bill, that's not why we're here. We're looking for what's happening here is specific information to help us exec this bill later today. So that said, Representative Mannion, you're on again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry for all these follow-ups. I have a lot of questions. So the SVAC's purpose is to be the singular voice of the veterans. I think a lot of people in this committee have been receiving lots and lots of phone calls, emails from the veteran community specifically in support of this bill. Did any of those voting members, did they poll their member base to see if any of the people that they allegedly represent support this or not?
I know that a past commander of the VFW is here that maybe can speak to that. I know within my organization, I polled the members, and I didn't get anybody who spoke in favor of this. I only, and to be fair, I only got about 10 or 12 responses, but they were all, we support what the SVAC position is on this.
A question from me, Mr. Grady. Did I hear you correctly? And thank you I was going to ask the same question that the representative from Pelham asked in terms of SVAC, State Veterans Advisory Committee, who makes that up? And thank you. You answered that there's 20 different components to your committee. Did I hear you correctly? Did you say earlier that the committee itself, when it met, was unanimously opposed to the bill? Did I hear that correctly?
We met. We talked about. Representative Mannion was at the meeting. Representative Mannion was given time to speak. He engaged in some, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here. You engaged in some questions with some members of the audience to get some clarification. Then we went on with the rest of our meeting structure. When it got to my point is with the legislative session, and I started talking about the 15 bills we're going to follow for the next session. But then I also said, hey, I've got a hearing next Wednesday, and if we're going to change our position, because that's why Representative Mannion was at our meeting, was to see if the SVAC would either, one, withdraw our objection, or number two, support the bill. And we threw this thing open, and Chairman Lloyd there in the back asked 3 times, is there any discussion? Is there any move to change our position on this bill? And there was no movement in it at all. So I take that to be a unanimous consent, if you will, because we did not want to revisit our position on this.
Thank you. Representative Gagné.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Grady, for remaining in the hot seat. And you're answering the questions. Well, I remember Korea. I was 8 years old, 7, 8 years old, and I followed the Union leader with the little arrows as we were being pushed by the Chinese towards the Chosin Reservoir and all that good stuff during an undeclared war. You talked about we have to follow the rules, and most of me agrees with that, following the rules. But if there's enough pushback, do you think perhaps the people making the rules should kind of sort of review the rules and tweak those rules so that it would be more advantageous all the way around, including those who serve, who are called up every 6 months or every year to give up their jobs and their families and go there to another hot spot. Then they come back home for a couple of years. Then they go back to another hot spot. Shouldn't like the rules change? Maybe we could stop, my opinion. In my opinion, we should stop being the policemen of the world and going in there and then try to get involved with things maybe we shouldn't get involved with.
Well, sir, there's a lot to unpack of that question. But I guess what I would tell you is, if we shouldn't be wandering around the world, to your point, sir, being the world's policemen, then our active duty guys shouldn't be doing that either, and neither should our guard forces. And we shouldn't be making this distinction where we are just going to say we're not going to go because we're in the guard and the active duty guy is going to go. And I think a lot of what you saw, if you look back to for example, the incursion into Iraq in 2003, okay, by the time we started to send the Guard and Reserve forces in there, most of the active duty units had been in there 2, maybe 3 times. They'd already made 2 or 3 trips over there. And then it was time to sort of start blending in these units. And at one point, I read your journal article, at one point we had like 60% of the people that were in country there were Guard and Reserve forces. Well, the timing on that kind of works out to be about their turn, about once every 2 or 3 times that the active duty folks have to go. But again, we're opposed to this distinction, without a difference, because when you get called up to active duty via Title 10, you're on active duty as much as the active duty soldier next to you. And while you might think you have a mission back home, right now your primary mission is supporting whatever the National Command Authority needs you to do. And it's just as inconvenient for that active duty kid from New Hampshire not to be here when they're needed by the state as it is for the guard guy, in our opinion.
Representative Mannion, yes.
So you mentioned during the 60% of the people being deployed, during one of those instances, it was the Louisiana National Guard in particular. Did you know that they were deployed to Iraq when Katrina hit and they were not available for their state?
I wasn't specifically following them, and I don't think that Katrina, at least big picture wise, would they have not sent those guys if Katrina had hit a month or 2 months before they were deployed? That's a possibility that they might have tried to work something else out. But once you're in position over there and you have a disaster back home, then what has to happen is the folks that are still home have to do it, and you've got to rely on your neighbors to come in and help you. Same thing that we did the floods in Vermont. We sent our Black Hawk helicopters over there to help them because we rely on our neighbors to do those things for us when they either don't have the capability or they just need extra help.
Other questions for Mr. Grady, who has been on the hook for quite a while. Thank you for your stamina. I have one quick one, Kevin. We have a bill that's in the hopper with OLS. It's going to come to us in January with regard to funding for increased recruiting bonuses for the Guard. And we're quite aware that the Guard has had a tough time, as have most services around the country, have had a very tough time with recruiting. It's part of the reason behind the bill that we're going to get. So I've heard it said that some folks want to join the Guard because, as opposed to a federal service, because they like the mission of the Guard. The Guard is focused on New Hampshire. And of course, as already been pointed out, National Guards have certainly been used in a federal capacity. But the notion that Guardsmen, New Hampshire Guardsmen, may be deployed I've heard that has had a chilling effect on at least some folks who don't want to don't join the Guard now because they don't want to deploy. Could you speak to that? Have you heard much along those lines?
Oh, again, I'm not in on all the recruiting efforts and all those other things. And to the point of this bill that's going to come in, we in the SVSC would always like to be able to help our Guard folks out to recruit people. I believe that that our members of the SVAC are probably our best recruiters. People that have served in the military are some of our best influencers, is the term we would use in my other line of work as a admissions liaison officer for the Air Force Academy. That we folks are influencers that way. Some of this stuff, again, if you were to go to Pease, for example, and look at the tanker operation over there, we've got an active duty squadron there stood up right next to the tanker squadron. The crews are interchangeable. They're doing a real world mission every single day. Okay. So I would submit to you that those folks over there in the Air National Guard at Pease are focused on their Title 10 mission and less focused on, what can I do for the state of New Hampshire? The big thing about if you want to serve in a branch of the service and you want to be taught a skill by that branch and you want a lot of the things that people like about military service, camaraderie, those kind of things, and you want the ability to be always stationed your entire life in New Hampshire. You don't have to do if many of you were probably on active duty in the military and every 3 years you pick up and move someplace else because it's your turn in the barrel to move someplace else. This is joining the Guard, and the big draw there is if you love New Hampshire, you're going to be in New Hampshire. Now, are you occasionally going to have to do the real world mission that you're trained to do? Yes. At some point, you're probably going to have to do that. And that's just something that I think our recruits need to understand when they walk in the door, is that there's always a possibility you're going to be called upon to do your real world mission. And we don't necessarily know where that's going to be.
Thank you. Anything else from Mr. Grady? Mr. Grady, thank you for your patience and for answering all these questions. I think we knocked off a lot of the pieces of this that we need to knock off, as we allowed the co-sponsor so much latitude in asking numerous questions. So we want to move right along. And I will repeat, we have a lot of folks who do want to weigh in. We appreciate you being here, and we'll try to honor that if we can. But I need to remind you, this is not a hearing. You folks, Mr. Grady is here for our pleasure to help us to give this measure full due consideration when we exec it later on. So if those of you who want to speak, if all you wanted to do was just say you're in favor of the bill, I'm going to ask you to not do that. In fact, unless you have something new or salient or relevant that's going to help us, something that hasn't come up just now or earlier, again, I need to make sure you understand this is a working session, not a hearing. That said, I'd like to recognize the representative from representing Jaffrey Ringe in Dublin, Representative Santanastasso. Representative Senator Stasso, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. You do a much better job than the Speaker. So the question about Section 10 and our compliance with it, this bill doesn't do anything to take us out of compliance with Section 10. National Guard troops will still go to basic training that's funded by the federal government, and they'll stand ready to be deployed and destroy the enemies of the United States of America, just as they do now. It just says that we're going to do it if there's a declaration of war. Now, the AMA authorized use of military force questions coming up, and people are debating whether or not that's a declaration of war or not. But this bill doesn't discuss that. It just says it has to be a declaration of war. So that's, is it a declaration of war or not? I tend to think it's not, but that's a question for the courts. We're just saying it needs to be a declaration of war, which is already U.S. Constitution. So, the federal government seems to believe it's a declaration of war. And if that's what it is, then that's what it is. But, we're just putting our Guard in, and we're just saying that it has to also be a declaration of war from our perspective. So there would be no changes to our compliance with Title 10. I hope that makes sense. And then just you know, pulling funds, forfeiture of funds and all this stuff is highlighted in Title 32. So, you know, it's not even a Title 10 issue. But it's not relevant. We're going to be in compliance with Title 10. So that's just what I want to do is just reframe it into what the actual question is. Any questions? Yes.
Representative Sherliff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that comment about the speaker is the current speaker you were referring to about the excellence of our chair of this committee, just for the record. From everything I've read, if we were attacked today, Congress can't declare war, can it, today? Because we don't have a speaker. They could take no formal action. They couldn't even do a resolution in support of the people of Israel. So what would happen today?
Are you asking if New Hampshire would declare
No.
war?
According, I'll be clarified, and I thank you for being here. If the United States, if someone attacked the United States, we could not activate the National Guard without a declaration of war from Congress. As of today, the United States Congress cannot take any action because they don't have a speaker.
Okay, so I mean, it doesn't. If it's illegal to deploy troops or not is the question, right? Does the authorized use of military force what I'm trying to say is if it's legal to deploy troops under authorized use of military force, you know, this isn't deciding whether or not it's legal. This isn't the question. It's just it has to be a declaration of war. So when it comes time to deploy troops, you know, the governor has to, you know, Title 10 says, it actually says it has to be, you know, we have to comply with it for legal, lawful call-ups to war. When he calls the troops in, you know, we'll have to decide, the court will have to decide whether that was legal or not if it was an authorized use of military force. If Congress can't declare war and there's other ways of deploying troops, like it was alluded to earlier, in World War I, they were deployed before there was a declaration of war. There's like a 60-day thing or something. Then that's fine.
Follow up?
Follow up?
Well, then why are we entertaining this bill? If there are other ways to activate the National Guard for 60 days, then what is the sense of this bill? Because this bill says upon a declaration of war by Congress, then the National Guard can go into combat.
Right. So you could say, I mean, what's the point of this bill? The Constitution already says we need a declaration of war, right? Congress authorizes the war. But some people believe that they're not in compliance with that. They believe that the authorized use of military force is not a declaration of war. But to ask that question, we can't answer that question here. You know, people are trying to decide does it imply that it's not a declaration of war? That's what the bill implies. But we're not the court. We're not going to decide that if it's legal or not.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Representative Sinasazo? Representative Mannion.
I actually have the answer to that question. But nothing in this bill, so line 27, section 4 says nothing in this bill shall limit or prohibit the governor from consenting to the deployment of a National Guard member on Title 32, section 904. That includes repel invasion and quell riots and execute the laws of the nation. Nothing in this bill would prevent us from defending ourselves.
So some of this back and forth right here might be better suited for executive session.
Yep.
Representative Finney, did you have your hand up? Okay. All right, Representative Santanastasso, thank you for being here and thank you for your testimony. I'd like to recognize Leon H. Rideout, the Honorable Leon H. Rideout, who came all the way down from Lancaster, from the North Country, representing New Hampshire VFW. Welcome, Honorable USMC veteran Rideout.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank the members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. I'm Leon Rideout. I served 26 years in the United States Marine Corps from 1981 to 2007. During that time, I deployed many times, most notably in 1991 for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, in 2003 in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, and again in 2006 for Iraqi Freedom. Those last 3 deployments were done from a reserve status. I also served locally on many boards as selectman, and I also had the honor of serving as a state representative from 2012 to 2016, with 2 of those years on this very same committee. I have recently served as the state commander for the Department of New Hampshire VFW, and currently serve as New Hampshire's national councilman for the VFW. I will be testifying in opposition to HB 229. And I've broken it down. Since the Berlin Wall came down 9 November 1989 and the Soviet Union falling apart, there's been talk of a peace dividend. This peace dividend has been realized by several reductions in the size of our armed forces and the restructuring of forces that placed many support units into the Reserve and National Guard. After several rounds of drawdowns and restructuring, the Guard and Reserve are an integral part of our planning for national security. In 1990, the active Army had a strength of 732,403. The Marine Corps had 196,352. The Navy had 579,417, and the Air Force had 535,233 members. Today's authorized strengths, which we are not meeting, the Army is 485,000. The Marine Corps is 178,500. The Navy is 346,920. Air Force is down to 329,220. And we have added the Space Force with a strength of 8,400. These are significant reductions. Those reductions have required the Pentagon to alter strategic planning. Those shifts have involved the National Guard and the reserves to fulfill many missions of our armed forces. These missions around the world cannot be accomplished without the National Guard and the reserve. Do not mistakenly believe any large deployment of U.S. troops can happen without the support of the National Guard and Reserve. They are all an integral part of strategic planning. I would also like to address, because there was an editorial that came out using several things to support this bill, and I feel it's a bit misleading. It cites a story about a guardsman deployed in Iraq during Hurricane Katrina. Katrina was one of the largest disasters to hit the nation in a very long time. And the editorial would lead one to believe that the deployment of the Louisiana National Guard impacted relief efforts. That just is not accurate. Louisiana has approximately 11,500 National Guardsmen, which are organized into 74 units. And during the largest activation and deployment of National Guard and reserves during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, only 17 of those units were deployed, 9 of them serving on the front lines. At no time has every National Guardsman from a state been deployed at the same time that I can find, and I did research that. In fact, during Katrina, Louisiana National Guard pre-positioned 3,000 guardsmen in and around New Orleans itself. Prior to the storm hitting the Gulf Coast. Even if no guardsmen were deployed, the disaster would have overwhelmed them and required reinforcements. It is easy to find that within 96 hours of the storm, 30,000 troops were in the area. In total, during the disaster, 43,000 National Guardsmen responded to Katrina, and 18,000 active duty troops responded to Katrina. The response was not affected by the deployment. And those troops, within 96 hours, they airlifted 88,000 tons of supplies, and affected 17,000 rescues. So again, the deployment of the unit, and I went to the Louisiana National Guard site and tried to find out which units were deployed in 2006. Their website has no mention of a deployment in 2006, though I don't doubt that there were probably guardsmen deployed. The only thing they mention in 2006 is their response to Katrina. This article also mentions a budget alternative. What is that budget alternative? I believe the author is trying to infer that it is somehow the cheaper to deploy a National Guard or reserve unit compared to an active duty unit, but that again is not true. Those activated must be paid the same as an active duty unit, to include housing, dependent benefits. If anything, it's much more costly to activate and deploy a Guard or reserve unit because a higher percentage of them are married and have families. So there is no gimmick in the budget that saves the federal government money by deploying the National Guard or Reserve. There's talk about the executive branch being able to unilaterally choose military actions in theaters in order to activate the Guard and Reserve units. Congress must give approval. They got to at least declare a national emergency, and they still control the purse strings, which they can shut off at any time. There is no unrestrained military power given to the executive branch. Again, that's just not an accurate statement. It does talk about the threat from the Pentagon to reduce funding for the National Guard if this were to pass. To me, that seems like common sense. As a nation, we strategically plan to be able to use the Guard and Reserve as needed. If that ability is taken away from the federal government, why would the funding level remain the same? That's just a reality. Part of the duty of the National Guard is to protect the country. The reason the federal government gives the states so much money to run the National Guard is so they can use it when it becomes necessary. It was also claimed that the opposition only comes from the Pentagon and the New Hampshire State Veterans Advisory Committee, which I have sat on. And in case you're not familiar, the SVAC has its membership from every veteran service organization in the state. HB 229 was unanimously opposed at every meeting where it was brought up. The author did meet with the New Hampshire SVAC because he wanted to give a clearer picture of the bill from real veterans that have experienced the horrors of war. I don't know who he thought he was talking to in that room. There are veterans from many eras, many of who experienced the horrors of war, and do not want to compromise national security with this bill. Matter of fact, there's hundreds of years of military experience in that room when the New Hampshire SVAC meets. They are well aware of the horrors of war, and I just want to let everyone know that every member of the New Hampshire SVAC, whether they served in combat or not, is a real veteran. They are veterans. I have personally participated in 2 wars and fully understand the horrors of it. During my last deployment to the streets of Fallujah, I lost 11 Marine brothers in combat. As well, see over 100 earn the Purple Heart. War is horrible, but sending our servicemen overseas keeps us from seeing that in our own land. I asked the committee to ITL HB 229. This is a state legislature. The state legislature should not be doing bills that could compromise our national security. And I will take questions.
Representative Finney?
Thank you to the chair. I thank you for the former member for being here and speaking today. I have a couple questions for you. My first is who are we at war with currently?
Currently, there is no declared wars.
So I'll follow up. If we were to activate the National Guard in New Hampshire to go overseas to fight, who are we fighting?
Right now, we're generally involved in a war on terror, so it would probably be a terrorist.
Another follow up, please. Could you name a legally recognized state that America is currently at war with?
Now, Representative, just by the very definition of terrorist, they do not necessarily have a state. That does not mean they cannot attack us, does not mean they cannot kill American citizens. You talk to people right now with what's going on in Israel, and they'll tell you Hamas is not Palestine. But it most definitely is. Terrorists do not necessarily need a state to act from. We found out that in 2001 when we had a group working out of Afghanistan. It was not their state, but they attacked our country.
Other questions? If not, I have a quick one that I want to throw out there, and I think it's relevant. You mentioned 1991. You and I were in the same battalion at that time, and we went to the Middle East, went to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Now, at that time, in the fall of 1990 into 1991, the U.S. Senate had an authorization of force measure that was asked for that would allow President Bush 41 to use force in the Middle East, passed narrowly in the Senate. We were in uniform watching that closely. Now, later on, President Bush said, having deployed all the resources to the Middle East, he was going to use them anyway, regardless of whether or not the Senate approved the measure authorizing force. So my question to you is, what are your thoughts on what President Bush supposedly said, that he would go ahead and use force anyway, even in the absence of Senate authorization?
Personally, I would have thought that would have been wrong, but there was a lot of compromising going on. There was compromises on the budget that year and stuff that he worked on to make it pass. I will say that is one issue that we face right now with the hyperpartisanship in Washington, D.C. Could we get a declaration of war? When we declared war in World War II, I think there was 3 dissenters. I don't believe that's even possible. And as was mentioned earlier, there's such division, not only hyperpartisanship between the two parties, but division within the parties. We do not have a House Speaker right now. And if something happened right now, we would not be able to declare war. The first thing we would have to do is select a Speaker. So, and I'll also add, this is a big thing, we haven't declared war since 1941. Well, one of the outcomes of World War II was the establishment of the UN. Whether you like the UN or not, that is supposedly the governing body of the world and supposed to help control conflicts. A lot of what we do now is done under the guise of the UN. Anytime we have to do, when we were in the Gulf in 91, President Bush had to go to the UN and get authorization there too. So there's several folds that the use of force has to go through.
Thank you. One more question. We need to roll on here. Go ahead, Representative Mannion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for taking my question. So the one thing I would just mention is during the Katrina hurricane, there was 1,836 fatalities. Do you think that more of those people would be alive if more of the Guard, Louisiana National Guard, were in state to help?
I absolutely do not. That was a disaster. that nobody could predict the size of it. They had already activated and pre-positioned the guard that they thought they were going to need. So whether they were there or not, first you got to figure the destruction that happened in the Louisiana and the surrounding area. Many of the guardsmen couldn't respond because there weren't passable roads or anything else. The complete power grid and communication grid was wiped out. So no, I don't. And I think the response in 96 hours, having over 30,000 troops there, proves that no, probably no lives would have been saved if that National Guard unit had been in Louisiana.
Representative Levitt.
Thank you, Chair Moffett. The question I have is there a situation where you would, in fact, support HB 229? Any conflict?
In the current state and how we have set up our strategic planning in our military, I would not. Again, the National Guard in the Reserve is a critical part and direct partner with our active duty forces anytime there's a conflict. And I will say, even you got a major training exercise, you're probably going to find some active, you're going to find active, some reserve, and probably some guardsmen that are participating even in a large scale exercise because so much of the support units have been placed into those. This has been a strategy that's supposedly saving us money that's come down because people wanted the defense budget cut because the Soviet Union was no longer a threat. So the reality is our National Guard and Reserve are part of any kind of response, and they are needed.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Representative Rideout, or former Representative Honorable Leon Rideout, all the way from Lancaster.
I do have some printed copies.
Thank you. Okay, we need to roll on here. I think we've largely accomplished the intent of the working session. I know the co-sponsors asked numerous questions that have been very helpful to those of us in the committee to get some more fidelity in terms of some of the aspects of this. I do want to recognize some of the, briefly recognize some of the other representatives. I have a lot of folks who want to weigh in. The clock is ticking. We'll see how quickly the elected officials can get through what they have asked to state, and then we will go from there. And again, we're looking for something new, something that the committee you think needs to hear that has not come up either on February 3rd, which was a hearing, or earlier today. So that said, moving right along and hopefully fairly quickly, Representative from Northfield, Representative Gerhard is here. Representative, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I'll make this extremely quick. I'm just concerned that our National Guard is being used as pawns in a larger geopolitical game played by the mega corporations, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. And just a brief history lesson here. In the early 1800s, the French Foreign Legion was created in 1831. In 1835, they were essentially given to the Queen of Spain to fight during a secession battle. And for 3 years, they sent 4,000 troops, and after 3 years, only 500 returned. And I'm just concerned that we've essentially sold our neighbors into conscription for wars in places that the average American can't find. And I think that's extremely dangerous, problematic, and only going to increase as long as we believe that we need the latest and greatest equipment to keep our National Guard able to do what? We have floods in New Hampshire. Do we need these tankers? I mean, I understand the concept, but it's not really part of the defense of New Hampshire. I think we have more of a problem with Canada going full totalitarian right now than anything else. But that's just my quick outtake on this. And thank you. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Representative. And we do need to keep this to new information. Not that we're not interested in your opinion. Technical information that addresses the language of the measure that we're going to shortly take up in executive session. Representative,
Question for the chair.
Sure, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Could we set a hard time of maybe 11:45 to go into executive session? And I don't want to cut off any of our current former members of the House that want to speak to us today. But we did have a public session, and I know some members may have commitments, thinking we're going to have a 10:30 exec, where they may have to leave and not be able to vote on this bill. So that's something I would ask of the chair.
Thank you, Representative. I agree. And that sounds like a good time to wrap things up so we can go to the scheduled executive session. So we will move right along until no later than 11:45. So those of you who are wishing to weigh in, again, as I've said several times, we're looking for new information. This is not a hearing. This is a working session. I'd like to recognize a representative from Stratford, District 19, Representative Potenza. Is she here? Yes, she is.
Thank you, Chair. I was not able to testify before, and I'm not going to do that now. You wanted new information. So my information is my personal experience. So in 91, that's when I graduated from high school. It's also when I signed in for the Army Reserves. I was actually going to college, so in Massachusetts, and because of that, I did a split option, which they don't even really offer anymore. So I went to basic training. In the summer of 91, came back, and then I went to Virginia for my MOS training. And I missed going to Operation Desert Storm by 2 weeks. I was a water dog, 77 whiskey, and of course, their water treatment specialists, of course, are in the desert. So I think that everything that I've heard here is the wonderful testimony, but we're talking about rules and laws. The foundational law in our country, it's what we took as representatives to the U.S. and to the New Hampshire Constitution, is specifically Article 1, Section 8. That's what this bill is. It's really not rocket science for me. And if we can't have that, constitutional checks and balances, then what do we have? Especially in New Hampshire, with what happened during COVID, for example. I spoke to many National Guardsmen. I have a lot of friends that are in that actually lost their jobs because they were deployed here to answer phones and to inject our people at a racetrack. It was pretty crazy during that time. So, and if you don't have any sort of checks and balances on our executive branch here, that's a problem. And then going back to what was said about not having a speaker, the president has authority in Congress. We all know that, just like the governor here has, that can call us all into session and we can make decisions if there's a declaration of war or something like that that needs to happen. So I just wanted that as a reminder. But we have to prevent all of these hasty decisions. So requiring a declaration of war imposes a deliberate, informal process that necessitates careful consideration and debate. So, of course, it prevents a lot of different things in deploying military. The clarity of purpose is another one. A declaration of war provides a clear statement of the nation's intent and purpose in committing military forces. This clarity is important, of course, for the military and the public. But I think the most important thing here is the public accountability. The decision to go to war or deploy National Guard should be transparent and an accountable process. Requiring a declaration of war ensures that elected officials are on the record and the public can hold them accountable for their decisions. And then, of course, everything about doing with casualty risk. But even if you look at our international law and norms, the international community, of course, around the world generally respects that the principle that military force should be used is a last resort, and it has to have just cause. So requiring a declaration of war aligns with these principles. I think that the sponsors of this bill have been clear and that there's a lot of different things that safeguards, but The rules are not law. Our foundational law is our Constitution. And I think we have to follow that. Every single representative here that is going to be voting did that. To me, it's very easy. And I know that I didn't serve in a wartime situation, but and there's a lot of people that did. But we have to take these things, especially with what's going on right now. It's imminent that we act, and I think that it's that we have to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Wheeler, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Moffett, Ranking Member Shurtleff. I did not get to testify at the February 3rd hearing. I am a member of criminal justice and as a result have to be there most of the time. I do just want to read to you a quote by President Truman that was given during his farewell address that I think has to relate to this, a piece of a quote. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is the new American experience. The total influence, economic, political, and even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. What President Truman was warning about in that quote is what we are dealing with here today. 80-something years of the country which stood for what we thought was the moral righteous side in World War II, what I think is the moral righteous side, galvanizing the world and stopping the fascist menace. But since then have used that moral stature to destroy the world for economic, political, and social means. And we have a lot of men and women here, people behind me, who love this country and want to serve it to their full extent, but cannot do that if their service is being manipulated by the people at the top of our military establishment, used for purposes that are not the protection of the United States of America and our homeland. The forever war that George Orwell talked about in 1984, the one that never ended, the one that always had a justification, the one that was always important. I think we're going through that right now. I think the so-called war on terror, the wars in Vietnam and Korea, talk to the people. There's a few of them here in this room. Chairman Moffett, I know you served. I know there are a number of people who have served. Just talk to the other representatives that have spent time in Vietnam, that were there on the ground, spent time in Iraq. They will tell you that that was a war. And they will tell you how brutal, how bloody it was, and how impactful that was on their life. And when we're talking about retention, when we're talking about the admissions in our military service being at an all-time low, I think we can address that and resolve that by restoring trust in our governmental institutions, by saying to them, you will not be deployed unless there is a thoughtful, deliberative process voted on by 435 members of the United States Congress that actually declares war against an enemy. And we have not done that in the last 82 years. I think we, in the state of New Hampshire, have a chance to push the Congress to get that done and to implement a rule which protects our National Guard members. We can't do it for the Air Force, we can't do it for the military broadly, but we can do it for the National Guard, and I think it's a worthwhile thing for us to do here. So I thank you for your time, Chairman Moffett. I have to get to a study committee that I'm 15 minutes late for, but we'll answer any questions that you may have and appreciate your consideration of this bill.
Are there any pressing questions? Then we'll let you get to your other event. Representative Power is in the House. Well, she's approaching the witness stand. That's not the right word, the witness stand, but I do need to point out, it came up earlier, the last declaration of war was not in 1941, it was in 1942 against Bulgaria, interestingly, if you didn't know that. And also, the declaration of war against Japan, there was not three, there was one congressperson who, only one, who voted against that declaration of war. And Representative Shurtleff, I'm sure you
Jeanette Rankin
you are correct. Jeanette Rankin.
voted against World War I.
That I was just going to say that too, being a history buff. And Jeanette, yes, and Jeanette Rankin was from what state, Representative?
Wyoming?
Montana. All right. That said, Representative Power. Representative Power, welcome. Thank you for being here, and you have your mic is on.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Chairman and honorable colleagues. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today regarding my concerns for HB 229. For the record, I am Representative Diane Power from Hillsborough County District 36, representing the towns of Brookline, Mason, and Greenville. There are three topics that I'd like to address this morning. First, I will define terms which are critical in understanding the bill language. Second, I will highlight my concerns with the bill as written. And third, I would like to offer a potential solution. So first topic is definitions. National Guard versus state militia. National Guard is a state-based military force that becomes part of the reserve components of the United States Army and the United States Air Force when activated for federal missions. As such, the National Guard units are under the dual control of state government and federal government. State militia, or most commonly known as state defense forces, SDFs, are distinct from the reserves and the National Guard in that they serve no federal function. In times of both war and peace, SDFs remain solely under the control and command of their governors, allowing the governors to deploy them easily and readily in the event of a natural or man-made disaster. Today, 23 states and territories have organized militias. New Hampshire does not have a state militia. Status. Title 10 is federally controlled and federally funded under the command and control of the President of the United States. Operations that would fall under Title 10 status, for example, would be Operation Desert Storm, the State Partnership Program, National Guard training in a foreign country like Canada or England. Title 32 is state-controlled and federally funded under the command and control of state or territory governor. Examples would be natural disaster response in state, other emergencies like COVID-19 response, for example, drive-through testing, distribution of supplies, as well as drill weekends and annual training stateside. Approximately 96 to 98% of the National Guard is federally funded. Also, it's notable to understand that equipment acquired by the National Guard is considered dual use for both wartime use as well as domestic operations use. This equipment is used for training operations, which could be under Title 10 or Title 32 status. And lastly, state active duty, or SAD, is state-controlled and state-funded under the command and control of the state or territory governor. Examples are natural disaster response in state and contingency operations like COVID-19 testing. Next, instrumentalities of war. That is defined as a vehicle, vessel, or device designed primarily for military service, intended for use in such service. It may also include such instrumentalities not designed primarily for military service if its use subjects the individual to a hazard particular to the military service. So the second topic that I'd like to address is my concerns with the bill as written. I understand the intent of the bill, which would prohibit the National Guard from being deployed into active combat, which is a Title X duty, without a formal declaration of war by the United States Congress. Unfortunately, in my opinion, after analyzing the bill language, I feel that the bill misses the mark as written, and it does more than the stated intent. This would result in negative consequences, unintended consequences, if the current bill were to become law. So that said, I will not address concerns related to the potential loss of federal funding. I'm just going to focus my comments here with regards to the function of the National Guard. So what are these negative unintended consequences? Well, first, as written, if you would refer to the bill printout, that under section Roman numeral 2, line 11, that's problematic. Active duty combat is defined as one of the following three functions. So line 14, it's defined as participation in an armed conflict. Second, lines 15 through 16, it's also defined as performance of a hazardous service relating to an armed conflict in a foreign state. And thirdly, on line 17, it's defined as performance of a duty through an instrumentality of war. As such, any of these three functions can then be substituted for the term on line 21, active duty combat. But of particular concern is line 17, and I'll repeat it, performance of a duty through an instrumentality of war. This would result in the prohibition of a number of core functions of the National Guard. So concern number 2, as written, this bill would prohibit the National Guard State Partnership Program. Under 10 U.S. Code 321, training with friendly foreign countries authorizes the State Partnership Program, which is primarily training in nature. The New Hampshire National Guard has a state partnership program with both El Salvador, established in 2000, and Cabo Verde, which is Atlantic islands off the coast of Africa, and that was established in 2021. Therefore, the New Hampshire National Guard State Partnership Program would, in fact, in my opinion, be negatively affected by this bill, specifically by line 17, since training involves the performance of duty through an instrumentality of war. Concern number 3, as written, this bill would prohibit humanitarian civic assistance. Under 10 U.S. Code 401, humanitarian civic assistance provided in conjunction with military operations. Again, line 17, the performance of a duty through an instrumentality of war. For example, airlifts, transportation, logistics, force protection, search and rescue, which utilizes, for example, helicopters, heavy equipment, and water purification systems. For these same reasons stated previously, this function would also be affected by the bill. Concern number 4, as written, lines 12 through 13 of the bill are also problematic. Referring to the term federal military service, federal service falls under both Title X, federally controlled and federally funded, as well as Title 32, which is state controlled and federally funded. In this context, the section, it's unclear with regards to control, if this intent has to do with control, funding, or both control and funding. Concern number 5, section Roman numeral 4 of the bill text, lines 27 through 28, is of concern. It reads, nothing in this section shall limit or prohibit the governor from consenting to the deployment of any New Hampshire National Guard member on 32 U.S.C. section 904. So to be clear, the provision in section 4, Roman numeral 4 of the bill pertains to a single narrow authority under Title 32. Specifically, this authority deals exclusively with Homeland Defense duty. It's critical to understand that Title 32 provides for many additional authorities, which would undoubtedly be negatively affected if this bill were to become law as written. For example, all training under 32 U.S. Code Chapter 5 training, entitled training, that would be impacted. And lastly, my concern number 6 is any function including training in the state partnership program that occurs outside of the contiguous United States, UCONUS, it must be in Title 10, which is federally controlled and federally funded. To be clear, all National Guardsmen, whether it's the Army or the Air National Guard, on duty outside of the United States must be in Title 10 status. Any such functions would be negatively impacted if this bill were to become law. Not all training occurs stateside. Some training exercises occur in foreign countries outside of the contiguous United States. For example, training could occur in Canada or England. Furthermore, the instrumentality of war definition, Section 3 on line 17, combined with the use on line 21 for active duty combat, that would essentially prohibit the National Guard from any Title 10 duty unless there was a declaration of war. This, again, it includes training in a foreign country, including the National Guard State Partnership Program, because any of such duty, it involves vehicles, vessels, devices, or equipment, all by definition that are instrumentalities of war. Which brings me to my third topic, and that's the solution. And may I speak to my solution, which is an amendment? Is that, it's very brief because it's very succinct.
I understand there's an amendment that may come forth shortly at executive
Okay.
session. But while you're there,
Yep.
and because you're involved with the amendment, if you could speak quickly to that.
Sure, thank you. It will be quick. So based on my analysis of this bill over the summer, I clearly saw that there were some issues and concerns with the bill as written. So I reached out to the prime sponsor. The prime sponsor understood my concerns, and he supported my solution, which is a very simple amendment. And so I had OLS go ahead and draft that. And just to reiterate, my concern is a significant number of functions and missions performed by the Guard involves the use of vessels, vehicles, devices, or equipment designated primarily for military service. They're all instrumentalities of war. Therefore, my amendment simply strikes line 17, which solves a lot of problems. And finally, to be clear, to reiterate once again that if this bill were to move forward with that line 17, it would prohibit most National Guard deployments to be able to conduct training outside the contiguous United States, as well as to provide training and assistance to foreign military units abroad through the National Guard State Partnership Program. And to be clear, neither of these two are combat functions. So with that, I will conclude my testimony. And I'd also like to say that I did bring a subject matter expert here with me today. I'm happy to answer any questions with regards to my testimony, but if you're looking for a more comprehensive and in-depth answer to your questions, I would recommend that those questions be deferred to Colonel Power, who is a retired United States Air Force officer, and he also served 28 years of his time in the Massachusetts National Guard.
Thank you, Representative. We have a hard stop coming at 11:45. I want to give the prime sponsor an opportunity to say any words if he wants to, and then we will, as quickly as we can, go through the list of people who would like to speak. I'm looking at some of the cards that I have here. These are from some folks who were here on February 3rd and have already testified. We will do what we can up to 11:45. Representative Petusik, do you wish to say anything as the prime sponsor? We have a hard stop. We've already set up for 11:45. At that time? Okay. We will give you that at 11:45, 2 minutes. At this time, Colonel Power, is in the house. I recognize him. Knowing that we want to let some other folks have a chance to speak before 11:45, if you could give us the best of the best.
I will do that. I brief generals and such, and I know how to be brief and concise. Good morning. My name is Eric Power. I'm from Brookline, and I served in the Air Force for 30 years. I'm a 30-year veteran. 28 of those years, my first 28 years, were in the Air National Guard. So I've been a guardsman. I served as a civil engineering officer, then a squadron commander, then a director of logistics and engineering for the state on the Joint Staff, the National Guard Joint Staff in Massachusetts. And I also spent a lot of time at National Guard Bureau and at the Pentagon doing joint planning. So I'm very familiar with the statuses of everyone and how important that is. I also, did planning for many exercises and over a dozen actual natural disaster emergencies. So I know that statuses are important. And I'm very proud to have been a citizen airman, because the National Guard is special. There are 2 of the 7 components in the United States military that are Guard. It's the Army Guard and the Air Guard. The reason that the Guard is special is because it has the dual mission of supporting the governor locally in the state or territory, as well as doing the operational mission federally. And there has to be a balance there. And currently, there is the balance is actually sort of a gentlewoman's agreement on how many National Guardsmen can be deployed out of a state. And that's not really a good place to be. So I think this makes a lot of sense, this bill. So I'm in favor of this bill. I think it would help bring the discussion forward, help change the way that we do business in declaring war, and would also help balance the important role that the National Guard has in its state mission as well as its federal mission. We've seen a lot of more recent disasters, and people think it's climate change or whatever it is, but the National Guard has been used more and more and more in the past 10, 15 years, especially during my career. So I would like to also state that I think the bill as written does need to have that line 17 deleted, because when you're talking about instrumentalities of war, that's basically military equipment, and there's no real distinction. Guardsmen use that all the time, whether they're doing it in the United States or they're doing it overseas. So I think deleting that would actually remedy and make this a great bill, and would be good for the National Guard in New Hampshire. And I think it would start the conversation so that we would have the National Guard being able to fulfill its dual mission role in a more responsible manner. Saying that, I'll take any questions. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you for your great insights. Questions? Quickly, Representative Horgan.
Yes, a very quick one. We hopefully it's quick. In lines, you recommend deleting line 17, but line 15 16A is participation in an armed conflict, and there's no specification of where that armed conflict is. So certainly we could, at least in theory, have an armed conflict in the USA, but then they make a point specifying the second one, performance of a hazardous service related to an armed conflict in a foreign state. So what's the difference between participation and performance of a hazardous service related to an armed conflict?
Sure, I can mention that. That comes back a lot. The Army tends to do that, and my Army colleagues, the soldiers in the Army Guard, frontline folks are usually what they consider the participants in the armed conflict. Then you have combat support, which are the folks that are behind the lines supporting it, but not out of harm's way. And so that's what it's saying. So you're not going to go to the front line, and you're not going to be directly supporting the front lines without a declaration of war. And I think that's a good bill to pass.
Okay, thank you, Colonel, and thank you for your service. Okay, we have about 7 minutes. What I want to do at this time is go through from the top of the deck here, and if you've already spoken in February, I would ask that you not speak again. Again, this is not a hearing, is a courtesy to those of you who are here. I want to give you as many as we can a chance to say a few words. When we heard this on February 3rd, there were many veterans who were very, very serious, and I'll never forget looking at their faces and how important this bill was to them. That's why we retained it. That's why we're spending time on it today, and that's why we will come to an exec session at noontime and vote on it. Derek Prue. Derek, is Derek here? You said you had some written testimony. Is that something that you've already passed out? Okay, if you could share your written testimony, that would be great. That'll give us time to review that as we go into exec session. And while you're doing that, I'm going to look to Colin. Colin, is Colin here? Colin, would you like to take up to a minute? If you have something new? Colin and Derek.
Thank you. My name is Colin Mitchell. I'll be brief and succinct. All my opinions and statements I'm going to make are my own and no one else's. I have to say this because I'm currently serving in your National Guard, and these are my own opinions, not the Guard's. I've been a staff sergeant in the Army National Guard for over 12 years now, mostly in Illinois, many, approximately one in New Hampshire. I served on both flood duties in Illinois as well as COVID response. And there was a suggestion earlier that having more soldiers would not have reduced loss of life or other instances during flood incidents. And I can tell you from doing flood duty that every single soldier is necessary. And when you're standing on a levee that has the Illinois River risen to the top of it, and the other side is someone's home, and you're sandbagging to make sure that that levee doesn't disintegrate and destroy their livelihood, every single pack is necessary. On the COVID response, we had far fewer people than we would have liked to have. I was doing analytics work. We were deciding how to get the most doses of vaccine into the few number of freezers that we had available that could reduce the the temperature to the very low temperature needed for the vaccines to be viable. I wish I had more people with me doing that. I have 2 degrees in applied mathematics, and that was still very, very difficult. So the idea that more people being in their home state, doing work to defend and support that home state, the idea that that isn't a necessity, I don't think is factually accurate. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Nolan, is Nolan still here? Nolan Pelletier? Plasto.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, over here.
Yes, Representative Mannion.
Rep Granger is here. I don't know if he was in that stack.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, and then we'll go to the representative.
Nolan Pelletier. I'll make this very, very short. I did not make it here in February, so I'm a little disappointed in myself, but I'm here now. I don't always agree with Democrats or Republicans, and don't even get me started with libertarians. But what I think we can agree on here is that all of you sitting around here at this table are here because you want to do what's best for New Hampshire and its community and its people. The National Guard is made up of those people, our neighbors, our friends, our family. And if you want them to put their life on the line, we need a declaration of war. So please do your job and protect our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Granger, thank you for your forbearance. Co-sponsor, Representative Granger, Stratford District 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to talk a little bit about one of the former I don't know if he's still considered a co-sponsor or not. He left. The Honorable Joshua Adjutant was one of the co-sponsors of the bill. I don't know whether he's still or not. I don't know. But one of the last things he did in the State House was probably the best thing I've ever seen anyone do from the well, which is he went down and during unanimous consent, he listed and had a moment of silence where he just listed every New Hampshire resident who died in Iraq. That's 23 people. All right. And you can say we need the National Guard for national security. We need this, that, and the other thing. But can anybody seriously say with a straight face that the Iraq war was about national security? That New Hampshire was served by those guys dying in Iraq? That we actually needed those guys to sacrifice their lives for the protection of New Hampshire? Was the Iraq war protecting New Hampshire or America? You can solve that for yourself. You can think about it for yourself. But he left some people out because, and this isn't his fault at all. because there is no way to keep track of all of the actual casualties of Iraq, the fatalities from Iraq, because a lot of them died by suicide. And we have some suicide statistics, but we don't have all of them. We can't be sure for sure. And so there's a lot of theories about why veterans often commit suicide, but there is the elephant in the room, the one that we should probably pay attention to, and that is the pointlessness and the insipid nature of the wars themselves. If you go to a place and you have a reason to be there, for instance, you're defending your homeland, you're protecting the people you love, you're freeing slaves, you're beating out the oppressor and releasing the yoke of Pharaoh, whatever the case may be. You have a reason to be there, and even though you may see horrible things, you might see some awful, disastrous things, you might engage in some atrocities yourself, you'll know that you at least had a purpose, and you can actually sort those out. I went to Kuwait in 2012. What was the purpose of me being in Kuwait in 2012? The Gulf War ended in 1991. And this goes for every single war. So you talk about now the Afghanistan war, right? So you're thinking about the Afghanistan war. Had a really good point at the beginning. We were attacked. It seems like a justification. But then you realize that we had a war against Al-Qaeda that turned into a war against the Taliban. And the Taliban weren't even involved in the 9/11 terrorist attacks whatsoever. And then you realize that, oh, wait, we're trying to teach Afghanis to be Americans somehow. That we have National Guardsmen in Afghanistan trying to teach Afghanis to be Americans. They're on the opposite side of the planet. They don't even know where New Hampshire is. They've never heard of New Hampshire. They know U.S. because that's where the bombs are coming from. All right, and this is every war. All right, and it weighs on your soul. And that's probably why the veteran suicide rate is so ridiculous. All right, so imagine, now I had a pretty easy time in my deployment because I was only in Kuwait. No one's shooting at you in Kuwait. But what if you were the guy that was the guy helping the Saudi pilot bomb the Yemeni water treatment facility? All right, and what if now pilots are generally pretty smart. They can probably do their own research. And you look it up and you say, gee, why am I in Yemen helping the Saudis bomb a water treatment facility in Yemen? And then you look it up and you see, oh, look, the reason I'm in Yemen helping the Saudis is because the Saudis are mad at America because America made a deal with Iran. That isn't exactly a very good reason to be doing what you're doing. And once you see the consequences of that hurts. That's a weight on your soul. All right. Over 100,000 kids, women, and innocent people died from cholera. Cholera is an awful way to go. It's an awful way to go. None of those people were a threat to New Hampshire. None of those people were a threat to America. They had no idea. They couldn't point out America on a map. This is the poorest country in the Middle East. Al-Qaeda wasn't there. There was the Houthis. You guys can think for yourself. Do you know who the Houthis are? Do you know why we're bombing the Houthis? If so, there's a lot of, there's been a lot of claims that we already have a method for reining in the executive. We can go through Congress, through the authorization for the use of military force. If this is the result we get from the amount of control that we have over the executive, then what good is it? Yes, I'm glad that we have AUMF and Congress can pull the purse strings, but they don't. So we need more oversight on where we're sending our kids. And as New Hampshire, we can't say we can't send active duty overseas. That's not our prerogative. That's not our wheelhouse. We can definitely tell them that we can't send our National Guard kids overseas. We need them here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Granger, and thank you for your service. All right, the prime sponsor had asked for 2 minutes, and then we will break until high noon, and then we'll come back and exec this measure. Welcome, Representative Petusik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Representative John Petusik, Rockingham 13, Derry. I agreed to the amendment because without the amendment, it restricts the National Guard. I'd also like to address the fact that this bill is a bipartisan bill. As a lot of folks know, I've been here a couple of years. Representative Adjutant and I rarely ever saw eye to eye on any issues. But as Representative Shurtleff will attest, we get together once in a while on veterans issues. And he is my prime co-sponsor on this bill. I have brothers, Vietnam veterans, who are here. We did not have a war, but we served in a conflict. As Representative Shurtleff will attest, it was a war. We had friends, brothers, sisters who died. My thing is, we need to have a declaration of war to get into these conflicts and get out of these conflicts successfully. And I'm hoping you will support this along with the amendment and move it forward to the House so we can have this discussion among the 400 of us who can really dig into it. And I suspect it'll take a long time. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I appreciate your thoughtfulness on this. And that's my 2 minutes. Thank you.
Before we break, does anyone have a question for the prime sponsor? Rep. Simanian.
I just have a question to yourself and everybody in the room, really. Can I see a show of hands who supports the bill? Thank you.
Okay, we will, at this time, we'll break until 12 noon. It's 12 minutes until 12 noon. We'll come back and we will exec this measure. Thank you. Minutes. Yep. Yep. Let's.
Mr. Chairman, I think just don't want to make a motion, just so
Chris, motion, make a motion.
Can we get time for you to take a motion up and down?
Okay. I know there's amendment percolating, so I'm gonna take the amendment motion and then so Chris will be the, okay. Yeah. Thanks for, I would have got there eventually myself, but the 11:45 piece.
If I said something.
Yeah.
I've been in the same seat you are.
Yeah.
I'm back. There goes the neighborhood. I ran. I just ran up to my truck. Yeah, you were talking about, when you were talking about Katrina. It's 82nd down. Yeah. And that's where it gets, well, my son was, let's go get the dogs. Wow. And, so they went up back, one time he gave his feet up to, where that, I think it was the ABC. Head guy for him to feed in. They gave his feet up, but they went up, they found a way.
That's, yeah.
This one right here? 23 dogs.
And, they will, okay, folks, it being 12:01 by that clock, let's get to the reason that we're here, which is to exec this measure and surely take a vote on it one way or the other. My understanding is those of you who've been here know that there was a talk of an amendment. Representative Piemonte, do you have a motion that you wish to make?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for recognizing me. I'd like to make a motion to accept the, submit the amendment 2023-2276H that was given to everyone, I believe, here. And I think it's some, I just think it's something that may enhance the bill.
Okay, I heard there's a second, Representative Gagny very excitedly wants to second that motion. Representative Piemonte, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really don't have a lot to say on this. What I'd like to do is refer, if possible, my time to Representative Power that initially designed the bill, the amendment, I mean.
The chair will support your recommendation to defer your comment to Representative Power, and we will recognize Representative Power, who has obviously spent some time on this, a lot of time. Appreciate your time and interest on this, Representative Power. The amendment was submitted by Representative Piemonte. At this time, if you would please speak to that proposed amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So everybody has a copy of the amendment, and if you compare that to the bill language, the amendment simply deletes line 17, which states in the definition of active duty combat, it eliminates the provision for the performance of a duty through an instrumentality of war. And as I had explained previously, why this is important is that a significant number of functions and missions performed by the National Guard, in fact, involves the use of instrumentalities of war, which are defined as vehicles, vessels, devices, or equipment designated primarily for military service. And as I stated previously, that by including this language, this bill would prohibit most National Guard deployments, in summary, as I had stated previously, to conduct training outside of the contiguous United States, as well as the ability to provide training and assistance to foreign military units abroad, that's out of this country, through the National Guard State Partnership Program. And also, as I'd like to further note that these two functions, they're not combat functions in nature. And lastly, I will add that under Roman numeral 2 of the bill, line 11, the participation in an armed conflict, that's line 14, and on line 15, the performance of a hazardous service related to an armed conflict in a foreign state. I believe that's sufficient to uphold the intent of this bill. And as I said, the retention of that line 17, performance of a duty through an instrumentality of war, that goes beyond the intent of the bill and actually breaks things. So that's my explanation of the amendment, and I would hope that this amendment would be accepted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Will you take questions from me?
Sure.
Just to be clear for me and for the rest of us, Representative, in the original measure, what line?
Only thing that's being deleted is that line 17, which states performance of a duty through an instrumentality of war. So with regards to Roman numeral section 2 of the bill, which encompass lines 11 through 17, the way that OLS drafted the amendment is we're just replacing those lines with what's in the amendment, which essentially simply deletes line 17 of the original bill, which again removes this performance of a duty through an instrumentality of war, because that goes back to this definition of active duty combat, right? That's defined as one of the three functions. And then if you go down in section 3, active duty combat is referenced in Roman numeral 3 of the bill. And so we're just eliminating performance of duty through an instrumentality of war. Is that clear? The bill remains exactly the same. We're just striking line 17 in the original bill. That's it.
Okay, Representative, if we were to adopt this amendment, which it's been approved by OLS, it has an amending number 2276H. I'm reading the amendment and I'm seeing where it'll replace the language in the original bill. I think that's fairly clear. The piece of this that is not quite clear to me is that the amendment says nothing about line 17.
Because on line 1 of the amendment, it says that the section 2 is replaced with the following. It's just the way that they draft it. We're replacing that part, and we're not including. We're replacing section 2 with section 2.
Right. If you look, Mr. Chairman, it deletes line 17, which is number 3.
Yeah.
Performance of a duty through an
I see.
instrument.
I see. Okay, so by replacing section 2 the way that the amendment does that, that answers my question. Okay,
Yes.
so that this amendment replaces 17, and there's no need for any other. Okay.
Correct.
I have it.
It's just the way that they drafted it.
Okay, I got it. Does anybody else have any? Is that clear to everyone else? Representative Rollins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does that include B under that? Does that include 18 because that's part of section 2?
No.
No.
No. B remains.
B remains.
Yep.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Representative.
Any other questions for the drafter? Okay, thank you, Representative Power. Representative?
Turn your mic on, please.
Sorry. Okay, I would just like to clarify that line 17, the number 3 is not replaced, it's just being taken out. Am I correct?
That is correct, Representative.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks, Representative Sabert. Anything else for Representative Power? All right, seeing none, thank you for
Thank you.
assisting us with that. This is Representative Piemonte's proposed amendment. I have a sense of it. Does anybody else have any, is there anything else on the amendment? Representative Mannion?
So, from my understanding, the instrumentality of war is like defined, especially by the Department of Defense and the IRS, as something as like how to define somebody as a part of combat duty. Like, so if you were to be allowed hazard pay or combat pay, that is also the same language that they use. It wouldn't cover just driving in a Jeep in like Mexico. You would have to be, participating in some type of armed conflict, even if you're not in the area. It would be like mid-air refueling over like outside of a combat zone, but supplying a combat zone, or convoys of trucks supplying a combat zone but not setting foot inside. You would qualify as combat pay. That's my take on this. But if this amendment, makes everybody in the committee happy, then that's fine.
Anything else on the amendment? Representative Gagnon, I see you poised, but
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was just like a paratrooper getting hazardous duty pay for being a paratrooper, whether he's jumping at that time or not.
thank you for that. That being from a Navy man. Anything else? Representative Shurtleff?
How can I follow that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the member from Brookline for bringing this amendment in. And I also want to thank the Colonel for being with her today and for his testimony. I'm going to vote against the amendment, not that I'm opposed to what it's trying to do, but I would rather see this amendment incorporated in a new bill and to have it maybe go into rules for a late filing and bring it back as a complete bill and let us vet it all at one time. I know the chair had a little bit of confusion at first, as did I when on my first blush. I think this does improve the bill, but I'd rather see it as a total package that we could take up at one time and be able to vet it. This is an important bill. We can see by the number of people that have turned out today, and we appreciate them being here. And again, this is no reflection on the member. It's just that I'd like to see as part of one bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Anything else? The last comment that I will make is that the representative just said that he thought that the new language did improve the bill. My sense is that the members see this as an improvement. If this amendment were to pass, then we would take the bill up as amended. If the amendment does not pass, we'll take the original bill up and we will vote on that. If this does improve the language, and I am inclined to support it. Rule of thumb being that even if you don't like the measure, if an amendment improves it, we want to see the best measure go forward if it goes forward. That is my take on it. Anything else before we have the clerk run the roll? Seeing no other comments, Madam Clerk, if you would.
Sorry.
Sure.
I just wanted to make a quick statement before we go into the voting, active voting session. Even with the amendment, I'm a little concerned over some of the things in the bills, or in this bill. And I just want to make sure that that if anything did happen, I could talk. Constitutionally speaking, I'm concerned about this bill because technically the information that we received from Warren Perry, Deputy Adjutant General, had noted that the National Guard is called to active duty under the provisions of Title 10 of the U.S. Code. And it says in times of war of national emergency declared by Congress or when otherwise authorized by law. And he pointed that out to us all. And then on top of that, I worry that if we require a declaration of war, it would seriously hinder our armed forces' ability to swiftly respond to a national emergency. and it could limit our support of the armed forces. For anybody else who's overseas, and I don't want to do that. And it could potentially seriously affect the federal funding to our state. Those are really big concerns that I have here, even if the bill is amended. However, I also really want to speak to all of the veterans and citizens who reached out to me on this specific bill. I heard you. And in late August, I had to take an emergency trip back to Kansas to attend my Uncle Mike's funeral. He was a Marine, and he was enlisted quite young. He had to get his father to sign off on him being enlisted, and he served as a tunnel rat. So he was over there. He was a Purple Heart veteran. And the lack of support that he felt, it really stretched deep. And he had many medical issues throughout the rest of his life because of it. His personal story weighed on me a lot when I was considering all of this bill. So I want all of you to know who reached out to me, thank you, and I heard you, and I understand, but I still can't overrule those other concerns that I have here. Additionally, to those that submitted this bill, thank you. I majored in psychology, but my school focused on psychological research. And one of our ideas was that sometimes with research, you need to chip away or present something that gets thought moving and discussion happening. And it lays a foundation for other research to be built off of. And it's slow progress, but over time, eventually, those hypotheses are tested and proven or disproven. And I feel like this bill, to those who choose to listen, can provide some of that foundational work. Understanding that New Hampshire and all over the country, veterans have a higher suicide rate than the average citizen population. I ask those here to recognize and understand that this bill directly identifies one specific area where our veterans feel they are lacking that support. Not only did many veterans who contacted me identify this, but they wanted me to support this bill to prevent others feeling from what they had felt. And this is absolutely crucial to listening to the psychology behind all of this. So anybody who has the authority to do so or can talk to people in a federal level in any way, shape, or form, I think we need to be bringing up and bringing attention to this bill and this particular interest that has been generated here. I believe we would be smart to listen and to pay attention and to lean into this and act proactively to support and better serve those who have served our country. If anyone here has the power to act upon that, please take this bill to heart. I vote no, or I'm going to vote no, due to the reasons stated, but I thank all who submitted this. So thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Representative Lloyd, and bless your Uncle Mike. Hurrah, Semper Fi to him. It's important to remember these folks like you just did. Thank you for that. Anything else before we run the roll? Seeing nothing, Madam Clerk, if you would do a roll call vote on the proposed passage of the proposed amendment.
A roll call vote on the adoption of Amendment 2023-2276H. Representative Rollins.
Yes.
Representative Lundgren. Oh, gone. Representative Katasaurus.
No.
Representative Levitt.
Aye.
Representative Harley.
Yes.
Representative Gagny.
Yes.
Representative Piemonte.
Yes.
Representative Finney.
Yes.
Representative Mannion.
No.
Representative Shirtliff.
No.
Representative Massmilla is actually Chris Schultz, right?
Yes, Representative Carey. My vote, though, is no.
No, it's no. Okay. Representative Boris.
No.
Representative Carey, yes. Representative Neer, who is replaced by No?
Minier.
You're Manir.
Tillerson.
Okay.
I vote no on the amendment.
Okay, and this is Laura. Okay. Nope, okay. Representative Toll. Horgan, so it's Horgan, okay. Okay, and your no? Representative Judy?
No.
Okay, Representative Lloyd?
No.
Representative O'Neill?
No.
And Representative Siebert?
No.
And, let's see this one. Chair?
Yes.
11 to 8.
8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we have 8 in favor and 11 opposed. The amendment fails.
So the amendment fails, 8 in favor, 11 opposed. That brings us back to the original measure, which we need to take action on. I'm looking for a motion, perhaps, Representative Shurtleff, you said you had an individual with a motion, perhaps? That was Representative
Apologies,
Lloyd.
that was me. I probably spoke out of turn, but thank you.
Okay, so now that the amendment has been voted down, Representative Lloyd, you have a motion, a subsequent motion.
No, it was just to speak to what I had just spoken to, and unfortunately, I'm still voting no. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Shurtleff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd vote, I'd move ITL in expedient to legislate.
Is there a second?
Did somebody say something?
The motion has been seconded, original motion by Representative Shurtleff. Motion on the floor in front of the committee is ITL and expedient to legislate. Representative, would you care to speak to your motion?
Just briefly, because we've been here a while, and I thank everybody's patience. First of all, let me say that the prime sponsor of this bill is not just a friend. I consider him a good friend. And I've been honored to serve as co-sponsors of other bills that he's done. And I've got tremendous respect for him and all the co-sponsors of this bill. As the member said, this bill needs a little bit of work. And I think this amendment that we heard about could help it. But I wonder if there are other parts of this bill that we don't understand. And what I would recommend to my good friend from Derry is if the bill should not pass today with a recommendation of OTP, to go back to the Rules Committee and mention that this information that came up at this hearing and ask for a late filing to file the bill again so that the bill could be considered in its totality with the amendment. And I would just say, Mr. Chairman, I would ask the committee to please vote for the ITL, but the recommendation to my friend from Derry is to bring it back through Rules with the improvements.
Thank you, Representative. Your comments have been recorded, and your recommendation is well taken. It's also being recorded, is being streamed. Anything else? Would anyone else care to speak to the ITL motion? Representative Finney?
Am I speaking to the motion, or can I speak to the bill?
We're discussing the motion, which is ITL, so you can speak. You're not speaking to the motion. You're speaking to the bill, the merit of the bill.
Okay. I'm going to vote against the ITL. I think it's important that, as we heard earlier, our terms were already set for us. We're only specifically talking about sending a New Hampshire, New Hampshire service people into active combat areas. We're not talking about training. I served 10 years in the Guard in this state, and I was a construction engineer. I was sent to El Salvador. I've been to United Arab Emirates. Those are not combat areas. Those are training areas. Those training things don't change. We're only specifically talking about being sent into active combat areas, which is what our infantry units in New Hampshire have already been doing. They've done at least 3 that I can think of off the top of my head. And considering the current events happening in the world, we're potentially saying that our state is okay with the federal government, without any type of act from Congress, to tell Governor Sununu or whoever in the future that we will send troops to Israel, that we're going to send troops to Ukraine, and then it becomes our problem when we weren't even involved. The problem is that we're involving too much of ourselves in excuse me, the happenings in foreign states. And it's the bill is specific in line 15, the performance of a hazardous service relating to an armed conflict in a foreign state. No one is talking about what's happening here. We're only talking about being sent into foreign countries to subsequently subsidize foreign states, through their, through their government, through their military, and through our training. We are still providing our lives to them, not for our own interests, but for theirs. And that's not what what the mission is. People that serve in the Guard are to serve the state of New Hampshire, not to serve foreign interests or corporate interests. It's only for armed conflict. That's the only thing that this bill is talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Mannion, again.
Thank you. So I oppose the ITL motion for several reasons I'm going to outline. Congress cannot hand over its constitutionally delegated power to another branch of government. That would be like SCOTUS writing legislation, POTUS confirming their judge appointments. The process requires a constitutional amendment ratified by the states. Contact our representation has not worked for over 20 years. The very activists that came up with Defend the Guard tried that route for decades. Congress has failed us. Senator Rand Paul's latest vote to repeal the 2001 AUMF garnered 10 votes in the Senate. The legislative branch is not willing to declaw back their war-making authority from the executive because it shields them from the consequences that they'd have to live with for actually voting for war. The 2001 AUMF is still active, with no clearly defined targets, duration, theater of operation, or victory conditions. Military campaigns have been launched in at least 22 countries, largely classified. It's used to justify coups across regions, some of which involved working with ISIS and Al-Qaeda in theaters such as Libya and Syria. So the argument that we're fighting terrorism with these AUMFs, sometimes we fight with the terrorists. In Syria, speaking of Syria, the Louisiana National Guard came under rocket attacks from Iranian-backed militants this past spring. And what are these troops doing in Syria? They're guarding private oil wells. So we talk about funding and losing potential funding here. Congress handles funding. It's the word we keep hearing. The fiscal note says that it puts the money at risk. This would be political suicide for Shaheen, Hassan, Pappas, Custer to vote against the National Guard. Congressman Gosar and Congressman Massey have gone on record to say that there are no active discussions at all in Congress to withhold the money for any National Guard unit. It would be absolute political suicide. During my presentation to SVAC, I requested the bill's opposition be removed, but not necessarily to change to support. I just wanted the opposition removed. It became rapidly apparent that the Department of Military Affairs has an oversized influence on an organization whose mission is to support veterans. Nothing can support veterans more than preventing service members from being abused by the United States Department of Defense and coming home broken. After the presentation, several non-voting members approached me to say they supported the bill. This has been the same reaction I've received at VFW's, American Legions, and even via email and phone calls after I published my New Hampshire Journal article, and again in my local paper. The bill is outright adored by just about every person who hears about it, many of whom are veterans. There's a massive disconnect between the voting members of SVAC and the veterans they are charged with representing. It is my belief that the Department of Military Affairs and Department of Veteran Services being combined is a conflict of interest and high on my list of priorities in 2025 to remedy when I run again. Thankfully, this bill's journey has brought this to my attention. This is a bill whose time has come. Over the decades, several states have realized that waiting for Congress to do the right thing is a fool's errand. We're looking at things like civil asset forfeiture is being overturned at the state level. States legalizing cannabis for medical use is something the federal government prohibits. The states need to claw back their authority here. States legalized gay marriage for decades before SCOTUS made a ruling on it. Various sanctuary policies, whether it's immigration or Second Amendment, these are also pushed by the states asserting their 10th Amendment rights. Defend the Guard fills a similar gap to say enough is enough. We're tired of the Pentagon's budget-saving measure of exploiting state militias. If the Department of Defense can't recruit enough active duty Army or can't afford to house and train them. These are symptoms of the exact problem Defend the Guard is trying to remedy. We are stretched too thin in too many regions fighting wars that are undeclared. Our men or women are coming home sometimes in boxes, other times physically and emotionally scarred for life. All the while, states are left without their citizen soldiers during emergencies. And for what? Can anyone in this room say we were better off for our actions in Afghanistan? 20 years of bloodshed to hand the country back to the Taliban, now better equipped with abandoned gear. What about Iraq? A war based on a lie, where much of our gifted equipment and even Iraqi soldiers we trained ended up joining ISIS. So once again, fighting terrorism, but creating more terrorism. Instituting a caliphate worse than Saddam ever was. Ongoing regime change around the entire region, from Libya, where we assisted ISIS and Al-Qaeda in overthrowing Gaddafi, left the area in chaos. A literal slave trade is active in the streets of this country now. What about Syria? Another regime change conflict predicated on a lie, where we once again trained...
Representative, we're getting into a lot of specific national policy deployment issues, and we need to exec this, and if you could focus on the merits of the specific language. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll skip right here. There's a nebulous description of our Guard missions where we say we're supporting our allies and protecting U.S. interests. It sounds noble at face value, except sometimes our allies have been ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And sometimes we demo our HIMARS battalions as if we're salespeople like Tony Stark to our allies. So Congress is happy with the status quo. The executive, regardless of party in power, is happy with the status quo. Just like with term or age limits or balanced budget amendment or prohibiting stock trades or withholding congressional pay until they pass a budget, nothing will change no matter how much we beg Congress. It's time for the states to act. It's time for us to act. So I ask we vote against ITL and make another motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Anyone else?
I would just like to make a statement that I disagree with this bill. And a big part of it is, you know, it's not just political suicide, but it's because it actually affects people. It weighs on my soul to cut funding for veterans, which, you know, helps with PTSD. And they're really doing a lot of work on that now. And, you know, compared to in the past, you know, in the past 20 years, they've really come a long way, and they've got a ways to go. But it weighs on my soul to do that we can save a lot of lives that way. So, and then on top of that, the money, I could see this bill as causing Congress to become even more gerrymandered, you know, and corporations pummeling more money into elections than they already do. So I think that's a huge part of this inherent problem as well. And this bill does not address that. So I will be voting against it, but I just wanted to make that statement. And thanks to all the veterans out there and the ones who don't support this bill as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Abert. Anyone else? We'll give you this courtesy. You're not a regular member of this committee, but we want to give you a chance to speak if you so desire.
Oh, thank you. This bill seems to be encourage. Well, if this passes, it would in other states to encourage Congress to formally declare war. And well, I certainly wouldn't trust this particular Congress, which is totally dysfunctional, as we probably everybody on both sides of the aisle agree. But
Representative, I think the nature of the current Congress is not part of the issue here with what we're talking about in executing the language of this bill. If you could finish your remarks, please.
Yes, but declaring war has all kinds of legal and economic effects, and I don't necessarily agree that our economy would even be on a war. We probably would have to step up, just like the 1940s. I think that's a very dangerous thing to be declaring war, because it had all kinds of impact on civil liberties and other domestic things. So it's probably not the way we've been doing things is great, but it'd probably be even worse if we had something like this was in effect in our state and the other states. So thanks.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no other hands, yes,
I'll be very quick on this one. I guess my concern is still outstanding in that I do worry that not being able to send our National Guard to assist our troops who are currently serving overseas. If there was an emergency, like, how would we be able to do that without declaring war first?
Thank you, Representative. Before we run the Madam Clerk runs the roll, my final comment. I want to thank everybody who's here. I want to thank the sponsors for the huge amount of time that they and others have spent on this. I think this is an important issue that we're shining a light on and having an important discussion on which we're about to vote. I honestly have been undecided on it. We retained it in large part because of how seriously we took the many veterans who came in on February 3rd and passionately asked us to consider this. And we spent a lot of time today. We made extra time to fully allow folks to answer our questions and address this. I will say that we're hearing different things with regard to SVAC, State Veterans Advisory Council. Representative Mannion, I think, fairly points out that there are many members of their subsidiary organizations who do support the bill. I have to say that the intent of SVAC is an advisory council is to help us out with legislation such as this and where do they stand on it. And knowing that many individuals support the bill, the fact that SVAC itself apparently unanimously opposes the bill has to bear some weight, at least with me. I do want to thank Representative Granger for your remarks earlier. Honestly, I think it moved the needle. It was, at least speaking for myself, that was very well put and important to get on people's radar screens. Last call for comments before we run the vote. Seeing none, Madam Clerk, if you would call the roll.
Representative Rollins.
No.
Representative Lundgren. No. Representative Katsazoris. No. Representative Levitt.
No.
Representative Harley.
Yes. So wait, yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm a little confused. Is this voting on the motion to ITL, or this is voting on the motion to ITL? So, okay.
The question before the
Sorry, I vote no.
Okay, so Representative Harley, your vote is no. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Representative Gagny.
No.
Representative Piemonte.
No.
Representative Finney.
No.
Representative Mannion.
No.
Representative Shirtliff.
Yes.
Representative, let's see, we have a substitute for Massmilla.
Schultz.
Schultz.
Yes.
Okay. Representative Boris.
No.
Representative Carey. Yes. Representative Manier, is that a substitute as well?
Tulerski.
Okay.
Tulerski votes yes on the ITL.
Okay. Representative Toll.
I vote yes on I'm
is
Representative Horrigan. I vote
Horrigan.
yes on the ITL.
Okay. Representative Judy.
No.
Representative Lloyd.
Yes.
Representative O'Neill.
Yes.
Representative Siebert.
Yes.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the chairman?
See,
Yep.
we have 8 and
Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's the same as the other one, except we've got
Missing
one
a
extra vote because we have Lundgren here.
What was the chairman's vote?
Chair votes no.
Okay. 12 to 8
That's what I have.
against
12,
the ITL.
12 to 8 against ITL.
I'd like to make a motion to OTP.
Subsequent motion from Representative Mannion. Your motion?
Yeah, motion OTP, and all the stuff I said before. Every single bit, and then the stuff I had to cut out too.
And there's a second. Representative Jurdy seconds it. Representative Jurdy seconded it.
second. Gotta find the other paperwork. For 12 date, 12 date.
So the OTP motion has been made and seconded. Representative Mannion, you've already indicated that you have said all that you need to say. Representative Judy,
Happy to say more.
would you care to speak as a seconding member?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Chair. I second it. Not only I understand the bill, and secondly, I received so many emails from the veterans, and I've always been someone who really care about the veterans. Even in the commercial, when I see them on TV, and those guys don't have no limbs or burning, I feel it in my bones. So that's why I vote.
Thank you, Representative. Before we run the roll call, is Representative Shurtleff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me say there's nobody, and I know you agree to this, there's absolutely nobody that hates war more than a veteran. And it's hard for me to believe I left Vietnam 55 years ago, but there hasn't been a day that Vietnam's ever left me. I appreciate the sponsor and what he was trying to do with this bill. I honestly don't believe this bill is quite ready for prime time, as the previous representative from Brookline told us. And so I'm going to be voting no on the motion of ought to pass.
Thank you, Representative. Anyone else? Seeing no hands, Madam Clerk, if you would run the roll. The question is on an OTP motion to pass HB 229.
So ought to pass HB 229, no amendments, the original bill. So Representative Rollins,
Yes.
Representative Lundgren,
No.
Representative Katsoukas.
No.
Representative Levitt,
Aye.
Representative Harley,
Yes.
Representative Gagny,
Yes.
Representative Piemonte,
Yes.
Representative Finney,
Yes.
Representative Mannion,
Yes.
Representative Shirtliff,
No.
Representative, let's see.
Schultz?
Schultz. All right, and your vote?
No.
No, okay. Representative Boris,
Yes.
Representative Carey, no. Representative Manier, who is Teleriski,
Vote no.
no. Okay. Representative Toll,
Representative Horrigan and substituting for Representative Toll, so I vote no on the ought to pass.
okay. Representative Judy,
Yes.
okay. Representative Lloyd,
No.
Representative O'Neill,
No.
Representative Siebert,
No.
okay.
The chair.
And the chair?
Yes.
10-10.
1, 2, 6, 7. Oh, boy. Can I double check the vote, please? So with our substitutes, Schultz, you voted no. Manier, who is Teleriski, you voted how? No. Okay. And Toll, who is Horrigan, you voted
I also voted no.
no. Okay. Okay. 2, 3. So it is a tied vote of 10-10.
Yes, so the final vote is 10-10 on the OTP motion. So that is how it will go to the full House. We need a report for Representative Manuel. You'll write a report in favor of the OTP. We need a corresponding report for ITL. Representative Shurtleff will do that. Okay, so that is our one bill. We finished. I'm going to adjourn this, and I would ask that the members stay around. We have an announcement or two from the clerk.
Yes, so since the issue of mental health did come up, we have Stella Laro from the Veterans Administration who has offered to put together a presentation from the Veterans. We have a representative from the VA, Stella Laro, who's offered to put together some individuals from the Veterans Administration to talk about what mental health services are available to veterans and to answer any questions we have regarding mental health services. If this is something the committee would like to do, I'd be glad to reach back out to her to set a date. We might be able to do that. Chair, do you have a date in mind?
I do not, but when we all come back in January,
good seeing you.
that
Thank
makes
you.
sense to try to do
Yes.
something then.
So I will try to get something together for January. Secondarily, we had 2 veterans reach out to this committee during the time we were not meeting. Both veterans had their issues addressed by the VA. So my understanding is they were successful. So that's good news. And thank you for everyone who reached out to try to support these veterans.
Thank you for the work that you did on that too, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you all. We'll see you down the road.
Thanks for having us. Semper Fidelis.
Hoorah, Semper Fi.